Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Our story begins with a chilling scene. A young woman is happily live streaming, chatting with her fans. Inside her cozy kitchen, she's telling an exciting story about an evening trip to the mountains when suddenly the camera shakes. A shadow briefly flashes across the frame. The viewers barely have time to process what just happened when terrifying screams echo from behind the camera. A few seconds later, everything falls silent. Not because it was over, but because flames suddenly erupt, consuming everything, including the woman who had just been joyfully sharing her story. And in this video, we will trace the journey of this horrifying case, from the moment it was discovered to the final sentence handed down to the culprit. We will also examine the killer's psychology. Why did he do it? And what led the victim, a kind woman beloved by hundreds of thousands on social media, to such a tragic end? We also hope for your support by sharing Lamo's story. Don't forget to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so you won't miss the next gripping cases we cover. On the night of September 14th, 2020, the peaceful atmosphere of a small village in Jinchuan County, Sichuan Province, was suddenly shattered by an explosion and a raging fire. The victim was a 30-year-old woman, a popular blogger known online as Lamo, who was attacked while live streaming at her home. At the time of the attack, many of her viewers were horrified as the camera shook, went black, and chilling screams filled the stream. Some of her friends and followers quickly called her sister Dolma, telling her something terrible had just happened on Lamo's live stream and urging her to check immediately. Hearing the news, Dolma immediately called her father. Over the phone, he described the horrifying scene he had just witnessed. Their family home had been set ablaze and was engulfed in flames. He barely escaped before a massive explosion shook the entire house, but the force of the blast threw him to the ground. When he regained consciousness, he desperately tried to rush back inside to save his daughter, but the flames had blocked every path. He had no idea what had become of her. Luckily, neighbors hearing the explosion and cries for help rushed over immediately. They quickly called the local fire department. When rescuers arrived, the scene was complete chaos. Once the fire was put out, it revealed blackened walls and charred belongings. Lama was found in critical condition, her body almost entirely burned. She lay motionless among the rubble. The victim was rushed to a local hospital. According to medical records, Lama was admitted around midnight with extremely severe burns. Over 90% of her body was damaged. She went into hemorrhagic shock, severe dehydration, and multi-organ failure from the burns. Her condition was so critical that doctors transferred her to a higher-level hospital in a last attempt to save her. However, very soon after, the young woman lost her battle for life and passed away in agony. The crime scene left behind countless painful questions. Who could be so cruel as to douse a woman in fuel and set her ablaze? What was the motive behind such a heinous act carried out live in front of thousands of viewers? Was this a random attack or the climax of deep personal conflicts in the victim's life? These questions were raised by investigators from the very first moment, marking the beginning of a long and grueling investigation. This shocking case quickly drew massive public and media attention. Beyond the brutality of the crime itself, the victim's identity stunned many. That woman was none other than Lamo, a Tibetan blogger well known on Chinese social media. Her real name was Mu Chu, 30 years old, born and raised in a small mountain village in Aba Prefecture, Sichuan. Her mother had passed away 8 years earlier due to illness, leaving Lamo and her sister to be raised by their father. The family lived in poverty, surviving mostly on collecting medicinal herbs from the mountains. But Lamo never saw this as suffering. On the contrary, she loved nature deeply. Whenever she had free time, she would climb the mountains with her father to pick herbs, seeing it as a way to relieve stress. She was also a devoted daughter, caring tenderly for her aging father. With her kind face always brightened by a smile and her simple way of life, Lamo attracted hundreds of thousands of followers on Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok. Online, she often appeared in traditional Tibetan clothing, confidently sharing her natural singing voice through lip-sync clips, or showing everyday life picking herbs in the mountains, cooking and caring for her family. Her authenticity and resilience earned her fans admiration. Many commented that she was one of the most genuine and simple vloggers online. But behind the screen, Lamo's life was full of hidden pain that no one truly knew about. Lamo married very early, around 2009, when she was only 19 years old. She married a local man named Tang Lu. However, this marriage was not peaceful at all. Tang Lu was hot-tempered and abusive. The couple had 2 sons together, but domestic violence happened every single day. According to her sister, Lamo was often brutally beaten by her husband just because of minor disagreements in daily life. Sometimes he even vented his anger on her relatives. Once failing to find Lamo, he went to her sister Dolma's house and assaulted her so severely that she had to be hospitalized, leaving a scar on her face that remains to this day. What is worth mentioning is that every time he committed these wrongdoings, Tang Lu would kneel down and promise to change, making Lamo soften and forgive him. But those promises never came true. Not long after, his violent nature resurfaced, and Lamo continued to endure the beatings in silence. Her friends said that she rarely revealed anything about her family, partly out of shame, and partly out of fear of retaliation. Only when things became too serious did she dare to seek help from her sister, but then she worried about the safety of her children and father, so she reluctantly returned. It was not until June 2020, in her final videos, that Lamo appeared with her father and children, sharing that she had divorced. This was one of the rare times she mentioned this issue. Before that, Lamo had never complained about her personal life, only sharing beautiful moments of the Highlands. She didn't want anyone to know that she had been a victim of domestic violence. Only occasionally did Lamo appear in front of others with a pensive look, trying to cover up the faint bruises on her face. On that fateful night of September 14th, Lamo was at her father's house after leaving her abusive husband. No one expected that after escaping one disaster, another would strike. She became the victim of a horrifying crime. Immediately after receiving the report, the police of Jingsuan County quickly arrived to seal off the scene and began preliminary investigations. From the scale of destruction and the brutality of the attack, the police determined that this was a particularly serious case of intentional murder, most likely stemming from personal conflict rather than a simple accident. At the scene, the strong smell of gasoline and traces of flammable liquid spread across the kitchen floor, showing that the perpetrator had prepared in advance. Amid the rubble, investigators found a deformed metal bucket, likely the container the perpetrator used for gasoline. They also collected a scorched lighter nearby, most likely the tool used to ignite the fire, and then discarded while fleeing. All these clues reinforced the hypothesis that the fire was not accidental, but the result of a premeditated crime. The victim's father, who directly witnessed the incident, became the most important witness. Though still shaken, he provided the police with crucial information. The perpetrator was none other than Lamo's ex-husband, Tang Lu. According to him, just before the fire erupted, he saw his former son-in-law appear in the kitchen. He held a shiny knife against Lamo's neck and shouted threats. In his other hand, he clutched a lighter ready to strike. At that moment, Lamo screamed desperately for help and told her father to run away. These statements helped investigators confirm their hypothesis clearly. The perpetrator was someone who once had a close relationship with the victim, because only then could he so easily enter the house while Lamo was still live streaming without her being on guard. In addition, a security camera of the nearby community accidentally captured a blurry image of a man riding a motorbike away from the area right after the fire occurred. The man's build and direction of movement matched exactly with the description of the suspect police were focusing on. From the clear evidence at the scene and the testimony of a direct witness, investigators quickly narrowed down the suspect. All the clues pointed to a familiar name in the victim's life, leaving the investigators both shocked and outraged. However, to ensure no possibility was overlooked, police carefully expanded the investigation. They questioned Lamo's relatives, friends, and neighbors to determine whether she had any other conflicts recently or had received any strange threats on social media. But everyone confirmed, aside from her ex-husband, Lamo had never mentioned any other danger in her life. While analyzing data from the victim's electronic devices, police were startled to find a notable clue on Lamo's Douyin account. Under one of Lamo's videos posted in June 2020, there was a malicious comment from a male account. "Every time you post a video, others call you their wife. You must enjoy that, don't you?" The account that left this comment was later confirmed to belong to Tang Lu. The content clearly reflected jealousy and resentment. This became crucial evidence showing that the motive for the crime most likely stemmed from personal hatred and blind jealousy. After consolidating the evidence and hypotheses, the investigators decided it was time to launch a manhunt for the prime suspect, Tang Lu. They believed that no one else but him had committed the crime against Lamo and her father. But first, the police had to face a major challenge. The perpetrator had fled the scene and could become extremely violent if cornered. So where was he? Immediately afterward, Sichuan police issued an arrest warrant and mobilized forces for a large-scale manhunt, noting that the suspect could be armed and extremely dangerous. Authorities deployed multiple pursuit teams during the night, while blocking all exits leading out of Jingsuan County. A few hours after the attack, while patrolling the mountain road leading out of Masaike village, a task force spotted a man resembling Tang Lu hiding in the roadside bushes. When he saw the flashlights of the police, he tried to flee, but the officers quickly surrounded and captured him. Tang Lu was immediately subdued and taken to the police station with the smell of gasoline still clinging to him and a few minor burns on his arms, remnants from when he committed the crime. His swift capture just hours later partly eased the fears of the local residents and ensured the safety of the victim's family against the risk of him returning for revenge. When arrested, Tang Lu appeared calm and cold. He did not resist, silently offering his hands for the cuffs, his eyes lifeless and without a trace of remorse. According to one officer escorting him, a chilling faint smile lingered on his lips, as if satisfied that he had fulfilled his malicious intent. Tang Lu was taken to the station that night for his initial statement. There he admitted to going to Lamo's house that evening and pouring gasoline before setting it on fire. However, throughout the interrogation, he was evasive, blaming it on a moment of uncontrollable anger caused by family disputes. He denied intending to kill his ex-wife, though the evidence gathered, from the gasoline, the knife he carried to the witness testimony, all pointed to premeditation. Tang Lu's stubborn attitude forced the police to employ sharper investigative measures to clarify his motive and the extent of his preparation. To strengthen the case file, the investigation team reconstructed Tang Lu's movements before, during, and after the crime. They retrieved his phone's location history and discovered that he had lingered around Lamo's house for several days beforehand. This evidence showed that he had been monitoring his ex-wife's every move before carrying out the attack. The forensic examination results on Tang Lu's clothes, which were collected at the time of his arrest, also showed gasoline stains that matched the type of gasoline found at the crime scene. Every link gradually came together, painting a clear picture of the perpetrator's identity and actions. At this point, the grueling manhunt had ended, opening a new chapter in the fight to bring justice to the victim. Speaking briefly about this criminal, Tang Lu, the perpetrator in Lamo's tragedy, was only 36 years old at the time of the crime and came from Sichuan, China. He married Lamo in 2009, when both were still very young. In appearance, Tang Lu was nothing remarkable, a short, stocky man who worked as a farmer in daily life. However, neighbors and acquaintances described him as rude, hot-tempered, and controlling. Since marrying Lamo, Tang Lu repeatedly displayed violent tendencies. He was irrationally jealous and demanded absolute obedience from his wife. Any minor conflict in the household could ignite into beatings poured down on Lamo. Moreover, whenever Lamo tried to distance herself, Tang Lu was willing to threaten her family to achieve his goal. According to the victim's family, before the tragedy occurred, Tang Lu had already carried out a series of escalating acts of violence. In early 2020, unable to endure his abuse any longer, Lamo filed for her first divorce. Tang Lu, however, refused to accept it. He threatened that he would harm their elder son, who at that time was living under his custody. If Lamo dared to leave, he would take revenge on the child. Out of fear for her son's life, Lamo reluctantly returned to live with him. On paper, it looked like a reconciliation, but in reality it was nothing more than a continuation of her nightmare. Only a few months later, the violence resumed. Once again, Lamo held back her tears and fled, taking her 2 children with her around June 2020. This time, she was determined to end it for good. On June 28, 2020, their second divorce was finalized and custody was awarded to Tang Lu. Perhaps Lamo did not dare to fight for custody out of fear that it would provoke her abuser further. Even so, she secretly took the children with her after the divorce, seeking shelter in her father's and relatives' homes. To Tang Lu, her escape with the children was a profound humiliation. He began plotting to drag Lamo back at any cost. In July 2020, unable to find Lamo, Tang Lu attacked her sister, leaving her severely injured in an attempt to force information about Lamo's whereabouts. The victim's family reported the assault to the local authorities, but unfortunately no effective measures were taken. Tang Lu remained free, harboring hatred and resentment, convinced that Lamo had tarnished his honor. Tang Lu's mind was consumed by possessiveness and an obsessive need for control. He forbade Lamo from interacting with strangers and even grew jealous of her social media followers. In June 2020, under one of her videos, he left a venomous comment. "People call you their wife, that must make you very happy, doesn't it?" This revealed not only his jealousy, but also his hatred at the thought of his ex-wife being admired by others. For Tang Lu, Lamo's act of leaving him was nothing short of unforgivable betrayal. His twisted motive seemed clear. If I can't have her, then no one can. His cruelty reached its peak when he made the decision to use gasoline to destroy the woman who once shared his life. The method of his crime showed his clear intent to inflict the most unbearable pain, both physically and emotionally, a vicious act of revenge. On September 14, 2020, what began as an ordinary day for Lamo would soon turn into tragedy. She had no idea of the danger lurking nearby as she prepared dinner for her father and children. That evening, around 8:30 p.m., Lamo entered the kitchen. She began preparing ingredients while live streaming on her phone, chatting with her followers. The last images of that broadcast show her in simple attire, bare-faced yet radiant, smiling as she greeted viewers and spoke about her day working in the fields. Upstairs, Lamo's father had already gone to bed after a long day of gathering medicinal herbs in the mountains. By 8:45 p.m., while Lamo was still focused on interacting with her audience, a shadow crept into the frame behind her. It was Tang Lu, the ex-husband she had been desperately fleeing. For days, Tang Lu had been lurking around her father's home, waiting for the right moment to strike. Seeing Lamo live streaming in the kitchen, he slipped through the unsecured back door. In his hands, he carried a 25-liter container of gasoline he had prepared in advance, and a gleaming knife hidden at his waist. Slowly and deliberately, the ex-husband approached from behind. Lamo, engrossed in conversation with her viewers, remained oblivious until a sudden torrent of cold liquid splashed down from above. She froze, stunned, before realizing the suffocating stench of gasoline clinging to her body and soaking the kitchen floor. In that terrifying instant, Lamo turned around and came face to face with the murderous glare of Tang Lu. Swift as lightning, he grabbed her, pressing a knife against her neck with his left hand while his right hand pulled out a lighter. The small blue flame reflected in the young woman's desperate eyes. Overcome with terror, she let out a piercing scream. "Help me!" Her agonizing cry for rescue cut through the night, echoing across the live stream. Upstairs, Lamo's father jolted awake at the sound of his daughter's voice. He rushed down the stairs and froze in horror at the sight of his child drenched in gasoline, struggling against her former husband. Yet despite the father's presence, Tang Lu showed no hesitation. On the contrary, his rage and hatred only seemed to push him toward carrying out his crime to the very end. In a brief, chilling moment, Tang Lu let the lighter fall. The burning flames struck the puddle of fuel on the kitchen floor, and in an instant the entire room erupted into fire. Flames swallowed the helpless woman in seconds. Her heart-wrenching screams echoed into the yard, sending her elderly father into shock. He barely managed a few steps before a deafening blast rang out. The kitchen gas tank had exploded under the searing heat. The blast hurled Lamo's father outside. Dazed, his ears ringing, he could see nothing but darkness. Tang Lu had planned it all. The moment he dropped the lighter, he bolted for the back door, avoiding the flames. He escaped without major injuries, jumped onto the motorcycle he had hidden in nearby bushes, and sped away into the night, fleeing from justice. His mind was consumed with a twisted sense of triumph. He believed that Lamo could not possibly survive the inferno, and that thought alone filled him with grim satisfaction. The tragedy of Lamo ended with her screams lost in the sea of fire and her father collapsing helplessly before it. Yet her fight for justice had only just begun. The horrific evidence at the scene and the sheer cruelty of Tang Lu's crime demanded that he be punished with the utmost severity. Would justice truly match the suffering of the victim? The answer would come in the trial that drew the eyes of an entire nation. Over a year after the crime, the trial for Tang Lu charged with the murder of Lamo officially began on October 14, 2021, at the Intermediate People's Court of the Aba Tibetan and Qiang Autonomous Prefecture in Sichuan Province. Previously, in December 2020, prosecutors in Jinchuan County had approved his formal arrest on charges of intentional homicide. At the first instance trial, defendant Tang Lu was escorted in his face cold and expressionless. In the audience, Lamo's father and sister clutched her portrait, tears streaming down their faces. Due to the brutality of the crime, many citizens and journalists attended, showing support for the victim's family. Standing in the defendant's dock, Tang Lu admitted to his actions but twisted his motives. He claimed he acted out of family disputes and a loss of control, denying that he had planned to kill his ex-wife. Yet the prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: his purchase of gasoline, the knife he carried, and the previous threats he made against Lamo and her family. Everything pointed to a premeditated crime, carefully planned and driven by petty vengeance. During the defense, the court-appointed lawyer argued that Tang Lu acted in a state of emotional turmoil and asked the court to consider his responsibility as a father of young children, but the argument was swiftly dismissed. The prosecution stressed Tang Lu's cruelty and violent nature, stating that his actions had grossly violated the right to life, deeply shocked society, and demanded the harshest punishment under the law. Key witnesses, including Lamo's father and her sister Dolma, testified one after another. Her father, choking with grief, recounted the moment he saw his daughter engulfed in flames, each word moving the courtroom to tears. Her sister expressed deep outrage, stating that the family had repeatedly sought help from authorities over Tang Lu's abuse, but no one had listened until it was too late. Their testimonies became an indictment of society's indifference toward domestic violence. Meanwhile, not a single relative of Tang Lu appeared in court to plead for leniency or offer compensation. The cold absence only fueled public anger further. Lamo's sister revealed that since the crime, Tang Lu's family had never apologized or offered support, but instead showed hostility, leaving them fearful of further retaliation. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, the court ruled that Tang Lu had committed intentional homicide. The verdict declared his crime extremely severe, his methods brutally inhumane, and the social impact devastating. For this reason, the harshest punishment was deemed necessary as both retribution and deterrence. The first instance court sentenced Tang Lu to death and stripped him of his political rights for life. In addition, he was ordered to pay compensation in a civil suit to help cover some of the material losses of the victim's family. At the announcement of the final verdict, the courtroom erupted. Lamo's father and sister embraced her portrait, weeping uncontrollably. Those tears carried both grief and relief, for justice had finally been served for Lamo. Many in attendance wept as well. Outside the courthouse, crowds applauded the harshest sentence for the man who had committed such monstrous crimes. The defense attorney for Tang Lu later filed an appeal asking for a lighter sentence. However, the Sichuan Provincial High Court rejected the appeal and upheld the death penalty during the retrial in January 2022. According to legal procedure, the case was then submitted to the Supreme People's Court of China for final review. By mid-2022, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court officially signed the order to carry out the execution. On June 23, 2022, Tang Lu was brought to the execution ground, and his sentence was carried out through lethal injection. The death penalty for Tang Lu was met with overwhelming approval from the Chinese public. Many people believed it was the rightful end for someone who had committed such a brutal crime. This case also highlighted the strong determination of China's judicial system to strictly punish cold-blooded acts of violence, especially those rooted in domestic abuse. And what about you? What are your thoughts on this sentence? Let me know in the comments down below. If you think today's story deserves to be heard by more people, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other chilling and mysterious cases. For now, I'll see you again same time tomorrow.